Let's talk about American farmers, the people who feed the nation, who rise before dawn and work until the last light fades. These are the men and women who have shaped the backbone of America for generations, tending the land with grit, hope, and a deep sense of responsibility. But in recent years, their resilience has been tested like never before. By early 2025, the situation had reached a breaking point. Across the Heartland, anxiety was palpable. The previous year, 2023, had been catastrophic, by far the worst financial year for agriculture in nearly 2 decades. Farms that had survived for generations were suddenly on the edge of collapse. Imagine your worst year at work, then multiply it by relentless floods, punishing droughts, and the heartbreak of watching your life's work wither away. For many, it felt like nature itself had turned against them. That was the harsh reality for countless farmers across the US, a daily struggle just to keep their heads above water. The industry lost nearly $22 billion to natural disasters alone. Tornadoes, hailstorms, wildfires. Each disaster left a fresh scar on the land and on the people who depend on it. The median household income from farming had dropped to -$900. That means the average farm family was losing money just by trying to survive. Yes, most farm families lost money. Many were forced to sell off land, equipment, or even their homes just to pay the bills. More than half were in the red, highlighting just how dire things had become. The stress was overwhelming, and the sense of despair was growing. On top of natural disasters, crop prices, corn, soybeans, wheat, were in freefall. The markets that once offered hope now delivered only more bad news. Mother Nature battered them, and the global market finished the job. International demand was down, and exports stalled, leaving silos full and pockets empty. Meanwhile, the Farm Bill, meant to provide stability and a safety net, was 2 years overdue, stuck in Congress as politicians argued and farmers waited. So, as 2025 dawned, farmers were battered, financially broken, and desperate for help. The future looked uncertain, and hope was in short supply. Still, they clung to the hope that someone in power would finally step up, that relief would come before it was too late. Instead, what they got was a move so ill-timed it felt like a cruel joke. The blows just kept coming, with no end in sight. The support systems they depended on, government offices, supply stores, even neighbors, were nowhere to be found. Isolation and uncertainty became the new normal. The crisis was just beginning. The storm clouds were gathering, and the road ahead looked longer and lonelier than ever. And for America's farmers, the worst was yet to come. Their struggle was far from over, and the nation's food supply hung in the balance. Just when things couldn't get worse, the Trump administration announced a sweeping freeze on all federal funding to farmers in January 2025. This wasn't minor belt-tightening, it was a full shutdown of the financial pipeline thousands relied on. Key USDA programs were frozen, locking away billions in promised payments. The freeze targeted programs linked to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and slashed funds from the Inflation Reduction Act meant for climate-smart agriculture. These were lifelines for adopting sustainable practices and surviving disasters. Instead, they became casualties in a political culture war. Billions legally promised were suddenly inaccessible, money farmers had already counted on. Many had taken out loans and made investments based on these contracts, now left in limbo. The impact was immediate and devastating, especially for small and mid-sized family farms. The policy hit hardest those least able to fight back, all while being labeled as cutting waste. To see the real cost, look at the faces behind the numbers. These are the faces of resilience, of people who have weathered countless storms, both literal and metaphorical. Skylar Holden, a Missouri cattle producer, had a $240,000 USDA contract for conservation. He'd already spent $50,000 of his own money when the freeze hit, leaving him stranded. His cattle, his livelihood, were at risk, and the future seemed uncertain. Adam Chappell, a rice farmer in Arkansas, was waiting for a $25,000 reimbursement for work already done. That money was critical for his next planting season. Without it, the seeds of his future were in jeopardy. With payments trapped, operations ground to a halt, tractors sat idle, barns remained empty, and the hum of farm life grew eerily silent. These weren't isolated cases. Farmers across the country were left making frantic calls to USDA offices, met only with confusion. The lines were jammed, and answers were few and far between. The sense of betrayal was profound. They'd held up their end. The government had not. The promises made to them felt like empty words. The emotional toll was as heavy as the financial one. Sleepless nights, uncertainty, and the fear of losing a family legacy. Farmers delayed investments, put off essential repairs, and watched their dreams slip away. Faced their bankers with bad news, trying to explain the inexplicable delays and the financial strain they were under, and watched their plans unravel. The carefully laid out schedules and plans for the season were torn apart, leaving fields unplanted and hopes dashed. It wasn't just a financial crisis, it was a crisis of faith in the very institutions meant to support them. The trust that had been built over generations was now in question. The freeze left farmers feeling abandoned. The roads they once traveled with hope now felt desolate and empty. Their trust in the system was shattered. The fences that once protected their lands now lay broken, much like their spirits. And the fallout was only beginning. The storm clouds on the horizon were not just weather patterns, they symbolized the growing uncertainty and challenges that lay ahead. The funding freeze triggered a catastrophic domino effect across the agricultural economy. First, credit dried up, leaving farmers in a state of shock and uncertainty. The sudden halt in government support sent ripples through every layer of rural life, exposing just how interconnected the system truly was. Banks stopped counting government payments as income, making it nearly impossible for farmers to get loans. Even those with years of good credit and strong track records found themselves turned away, their financial stability evaporating overnight. The trust that had existed between farmers and lenders was shattered, replaced by anxiety and frustration. A government contract, once as good as gold, was now worthless. Farmers who had planned their seasons around these agreements were left with nothing but broken promises and mounting bills. The USDA itself was gutted. Tens of thousands of employees laid off, leaving the agency crippled. Programs that had supported farmers for generations vanished almost overnight, and the safety net that so many relied on was gone. The experts who managed complex programs were gone, creating chaos and confusion. Without their guidance, farmers struggled to navigate regulations, insurance, and disaster relief, compounding the sense of crisis. The ripple effects spread beyond farms. Rural businesses that depended on farmers, equipment dealers, feed stores, even local diners, saw their customer base evaporate. Main streets grew quiet, and the sense of community began to erode. USAID, which buys surplus U.S. grain for food aid and funds agricultural research, was dismantled. This not only hurt American farmers, but also threatened food security for millions abroad and halted critical research projects. The Soybean Innovation Lab at the University of Illinois, reliant on a $30 million USAID grant, announced it would close. Years of research, innovation, and progress were suddenly at risk of being lost forever. The freeze accelerated consolidation. Small and medium farms, unable to get credit or funds, became targets for big ag corporations. Family farms that had survived for generations were forced to sell, changing the landscape of American agriculture. Rural communities suffered, and environmental progress stalled as conservation funding vanished. Projects to restore soil, protect water, and preserve wildlife were abandoned, leaving the land vulnerable. The sector's carbon emissions were projected to rise. With fewer resources for sustainable practices, the environmental cost grew. The chaos was complete. The freeze didn't just hurt farmers, it threatened the entire rural fabric. Schools, clinics, and community centers faced closure, and families were forced to leave in search of opportunity elsewhere. And the damage would last for years. The scars left behind would serve as a stark reminder of how quickly a crisis can unravel the ties that hold rural America together. The freeze hit hardest those already on the margins: women, queer, and farmers of color. Years of slow progress on equity were wiped out overnight as DEI-related contracts were flagged and put at risk. For many, these programs were essential lifelines, the difference between survival and failure. The message was clear. If you didn't fit the traditional farmer mold, your support was expendable. The freeze deepened mistrust and set back agricultural equity by years. As the crisis deepened, courts ordered the administration to release frozen funds, but the response was slow and symbolic. The USDA released tiny amounts, mere crumbs compared to what was owed. Confusion reigned. Secretary Brooke Rollins announced contract terminations and vague reviews, fueling panic. Promises of aid were made without details, leaving everyone in limbo. Farmers were trapped between court orders and bureaucratic stonewalling. The system was broken, officials powerless, leadership sowing chaos. It was a total failure of governance. America's food producers were left adrift. Just as collapse seemed inevitable, the Trump administration made a stunning pivot. On July 4th, 2025, President Trump signed the One Big Beautiful Bill, a sweeping legislative package for agriculture. The same administration that froze funds now positioned itself as the farmer's savior. The bill was hailed by major agricultural groups as a game changer. After months of chaos, the administration sought to erase the past and claim credit for the rescue. There was no apology, just a new narrative. For many desperate farmers, relief was enough. So, what was in the One Big Beautiful Bill? It delivered permanent tax relief, including a 20% small business deduction and full equipment write-offs. The estate tax exemption was raised to $15 million, easing generational transfers. Disaster aid was expanded. Programs activated faster, payment rates increased, and coverage broadened. Conservation funding was restored for 6 years, but with a shift away from climate mandates. Animal disease prevention funding was boosted to guard against outbreaks. The package hit all the right notes: tax cuts, better insurance, and protection for land and livestock. It was a comprehensive, targeted lifeline. The bill was met with relief and praise from agricultural leaders. Money flowed again. Disaster aid and tax changes brought immediate help, and conservation projects restarted. The panic of early 2025 faded, replaced by cautious optimism. But scars remain, especially for smaller and minority farmers, whose trust in government was shattered. Industry consolidation accelerated, and fundamental economic pressures persist. Climate change and market volatility still loom. The One Big Beautiful Bill was a powerful shock to the system, reviving a dying patient. But the underlying problems remain. The bill patched holes, but didn't rebuild the foundation. Relief arrived, but resilience is still in question. American farmers are back on their feet, but the ground beneath them is shakier than ever.